13th. Hello, y'all. Port Dover. I mean, really, is that a pain in the ass, or is it something that they welcome? All the motorcyclists. I think the media misnames it when they call them bikers. They're not really bikers.
They're motorcycle enthusiasts.
They're motorcycle enthusiasts. That's what they are.
My folks used to have a place just on the other side there at Turkey Point. And, boy, on these weekends, they went every way around Port Dover. Because it's just insanity.
I guess for the locals, like 100,000 people.
For a town of like a couple hundred.
Yeah.
It just blows it up. It's unbelievable. It's something to see. It's something to experience if you're a motorcycle enthusiast. But if you're a local resident, it's something to get away for the weekend for, unless you're a business person.
There you go. Yeah. Here we are. It is the Rit Race. We're in our usual position and posture on a Friday where we'd normally be talking about On the Ledge, but now we're going daily because we're in the middle of the election campaign here in Ontario. That voice you heard was Keith Leslie, joined around the table by John Wright from Maru Public Opinion and Sabrina Nanji from the Queen's Park Observer. Was kind of hoping that we'd be able to wake up this morning and say, well, the Leafs broke 2 records, and you know what? It all happened on the anniversary of the Kawhi shot and all. Nah. Game 7, Saturday night. I don't know. Kind of hard to sort of look away or look at it as the case may be. But let's say, I know the other day, Keith, you were half facetiously, half seriously saying, you know, if the Leafs do well, how's that going to affect attention span on the campaign? And we left off yesterday, and John was talking about the air war that we're going to see after the debate. We'll start to see a whole lot more ads. I would take election ads during the hockey game over the betting ads.
On
the hockey game, right? But I would think that you know, if in fact that's what happens and the Leafs can get over the weekend, I would think that'd be pretty prime territory for ads from all the parties.
Oh, absolutely. And we know it's going to happen. I mean, right now, it's smart to stay back and see if the Leafs do make it to the second round. And so we're still being inundated with those gambling site ads that are just so annoying and so ubiquitous. You just can't escape the darn things. The election ads will be like that probably after the debate next week. In the meantime, the parties are spending their money, hundreds of thousands of dollars on Facebook ads. Going right past the mainstream media again. Would work very well for Doug Ford and the PCs in 2018. They're doing it again this time, as are the other parties. They're, going at these directed Facebook ads. As much as, I spent my entire career in the mainstream media, and I kind of hate to see all this money going to Facebook. I understand exactly what they're doing. You can target so specifically, as we know, get your ads right. So they have series of ads. It's not just 1 or 2 anymore. They have a whole series of ads introducing themselves, attacking the others. It's fascinating to kind of see. But again, what you have to watch, it's just another numbers game. What are the metrics? How many views? How many eyeballs are they getting? Are they getting shares? All that sort of thing. So it's a whole different dynamic. But that's where we are at this stage. And we'll see them on the TV. They're coming. They're going to really get there. But right now, they're targeting on the Facebook.
Yeah, I've got the sports network up in the background, TSN up in the background here, and I'm starting to see, every break looks like so far this morning has a political ad. But John, last weekend I talked to Colleen Ryan from Sussex, and I guess it was back in the federal campaign. You and I talked to Colleen's colleague, Brett James, and we got into that conversation about how targeted the media is, or their campaigns are, that I should say, vis-a-vis the social media, to the point where, it's not like they have the liberal platform. They can have John Wright's platform and serve it right up to you almost every day. And that's how granular all of this, the social media is. And that's the difference between Main Street and the social media right now.
Yeah, and it's been in the works now for almost a decade. I mean, we sometimes forget that the first iPhone was invented in 2007. It's not that long ago when you really think about it. And up to that point, it was all above ground, where, the three of us who would have been watching a campaign would have seen it all roll out the days of the campaign and then escalate up to the debate and then escalate further after that. I mean, it's a very interesting time where you could actually say that the public was being influenced by certain ads. Now, it's so below the surface that unless you're actually tuned in and you're liking something, even the media don't understand what's going on in the targeting of it. But that speaks to the nature of how the campaign has stayed the way it has during this election campaign. Put this in perspective. In the last election campaign, 63% of people wanted change. That's a very high number. They wanted to throw the Liberals out. Right now, 48%. During the federal election in Ontario, 50%. There's a barometer that goes on, and you can tell when, in fact, a party is likely to be headed for the door. And there's always that maxim that says you don't vote them in, you vote them out. It's just not sticking. So what we're not seeing is the attack ads of the right now above the board, where the attack ads are basically the Conservatives fighting the Liberals in order to drive them down so that the NDP vote will drive back up again. The last thing that the Conservatives want is for that NDP vote to collapse. We are seeing a fair bit of it above the surface, but that's to your point, Dave. In the last 24 hours, we've started to hear the radio ads, especially in Toronto, where, in fact, the Liberals are starting to have deep inroads on the NDP, despite the fact that they're, losing candidates in the hinterland. The reality is that once you hear that they're above the surface, you know that it's a very serious fight. So we're in the home stretch now, 20 days to go pretty much. Nothing's really moving except on the margins, and those margins are going to make the big difference for the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I guess, Sabrina, we sort of touched on, speaking of social media, just the way the opposition parties are using it. And we've seen in the last few days Liberal candidates sort of falling off the ballot just, by virtue of being kicked off the ballot by the leader's office. But it's all around social media behavior. And we, the geeks down in the weeds here, we all get excited about it. I'm not sure that generally the voters out there are all that concerned, or let alone, I'll bet they're not even aware. But between now and Election Day, if you told them that somebody said, what was it, double breathing, or what's the phrase? Rebreathing, right? Rebreathing would make you gay. What? I mean,
only the babies.
Only the babies. Yeah, I'm sure that part of that is just so far off the radar for most people. But it took up so much oxygen in talk radio and media over the last couple of days. But I guess the whole point being around vetting candidates and being able to, just be present on social media. And I understand how that might be a story. But I go back to something you published in the Queen's Park Observer a few days ago. This was a couple of days before the final deadline for having candidates in place, and the Liberals still didn't have a full slate of candidates. What does that say about the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably talking some inside baseball here, but this matters. Like I think it's important to cover nomination contests because provincially and federally, like, this is the gateway to democracy. It really helps you to run for a party. You get the resources backing you, the recognition and whatnot. And so they're not as democratic as, a general election would be when it comes to the nomination contests and choosing your candidates. And of course, political parties essentially operate as private entities. They can make their own rules for who they want to carry their banner. And what we've seen now is, frankly, bad optics and rather embarrassing for the Liberals. They're running 122 candidates out of 124 on their slate. Even the New Blue Party, that political startup, which, regardless of how you feel about their politics, the Tory spinoff, they have 124 people locked in and ready to go. And so I don't really think this matters to the electorate at large. Of course, it makes for bad headlines for your opponents. It's fodder for us right now. And of course, over in Timmins and Parry Sound Muskoka, there's no Liberal candidate for the people there to vote. Now, obviously, those were kind of long shot ridings anyways for the Liberals to win, but they've kind of had to fire their candidates, because this has come out in a really unceremonious way. We mentioned the rebreathing guy, Barry Stanley, over in Parry Sound Muskoka. Like, it must have taken the opposition research like less than 5 minutes. I mean, even when I Googled this guy, we could find, this rebreathing book, and whatnot. So it makes you wonder, like, what's going on the vetting side of things. Stephen Del Duca, when he took the Liberal leadership 2 years ago, he was promising to nominate 100 candidates within a few months, just so they could start hitting the pavement, door knocking. Now, obviously, the pandemic provides a bit of a convenient excuse for that. But from what I've been hearing, the leader's office is very closely involved with candidate nominations and the vetting process. So it's really surprising that they didn't catch this. Obviously, it was coming down to the wire. The deadline was this week, just yesterday on Thursday. I don't know if this will last, this so-called scandal, these bad headlines, if it will last, and actually impact people at the ballot box. But at the end of the day, it's a bad look, and to, card-carrying Liberals. There's a lot that I'm talking to that are really upset about this and laying the blame at Stephen Del Duca, who, by the way, if he doesn't win the premier's seat, the party rules say that he has a leadership review. And I think that will be interesting. It'll be a good test of if people like, what he's done so far, what he's able to do on election night.
So we go from 9:01 to 9:05. Is that what happens? We've got them all lined up on election night. I mean, seriously. But there's a real, even I think, a legitimate question as to whether or not Del Duca will win his seat. Keep in mind that he is running against, a junior cabinet minister in the Tory party. But Michael Tobolo has been relatively effective in terms of his media presence, the file that he's working on, mental health, particularly during the campaign, the pandemic. So he may not be a bit of where Doug Ford may well sleepwalk. I'm not sure that Del Duca is going to be in the same boat in his own riding.
Yeah, that's I'll just quickly say, like, that's kind of the word on the street. The buzz that I'm hearing is that Del Duca, it's going to be a hard fight. Obviously, he lost that seat in 2018. And I had a story almost a year ago now, actually. They had been polling Del Duca's prospects. His camp were polling, his chances in Don Valley East, where they had Michael Coteau step down. We were wondering, is there going to be a by-election? There wasn't, of course. Coteau is now sitting on the Hill. But that's a very safe Liberal seat. And so there were questions, will Del Duca run there if there is a possibility for him in a by-election? Of course they didn't, but the fact that they were gauging that just kind of shows you that maybe they're sweating a little bit the Tobolo competition. Now, Tobolo has had his own fair share of bad headlines. Don't forget he wore the bulletproof vest going on a ride-along with the police. That didn't sit well with a lot of people. He's had his fair share of drama, but at the end of the day, I think he can definitely give Del Duca a run for his money, and Del Duca hasn't had a seat in the House for a long time, so this could be, fairly problematic for him over in Vaughan Woodbridge.
So, John, we've been talking the last few days just about sort of the tenor and the tone of what's going on in the campaign. And Michael Tobolo and I went to high school together. He's a lovely guy, quiet guy who I've had him on the radio show over the number of times over the last few years when he's been in office. But at the same time, there's nothing really exciting about Minister Tobolo, which kind of falls into the narrative that you were talking about the other day, where dull is kind of working for Doug.
Yeah, and it is working right now because there's no sense of urgency to throw the party out. I mean, it's always that phrase of, you don't vote people in, you throw the other party out. David Coletta at the Empire Club made a great presentation yesterday. All of his numbers are available on Twitter. You can go and download them, take a look at it. And what was fascinating to me were two things. Number one was to take a look and see how many people were revved up about throwing the government out last time, which was 63%. And now it's about 48%. And during the federal election campaign, it was at 50% in Ontario. And when you look at that number, what you find is the 905 is in play for the incumbent. The second thing that was also fascinating was that he had done a big survey, 1,500 sample size across the province, but he'd also cross-tabbed it by union, non-union, and public sector homes. And when he found that, Doug Ford was capturing at least 40% of the vote in all three of those categories.
Wow.
Which plays into, you and I go back all the way to Mike Harris's days. I mean, if he'd had a telephone booth of union supporters back in those days, he would have been ahead. Now we're talking like 40% of the vote. which speaks to the issue of highways, which speaks to the issue of the 905, which speaks to the issue of work and affordability and making sure that, people can, make a living nowadays to pay for half a gas tank. What's not serviced, however, in some of these things, and that's where I wanted to lead to, is there is a construction strike happening. There is, just below the surface. We've got all the construction workers going out now. The carpenters are going out this week. The laborers have gone out. We're going to come to a grinding halt across the province of residential construction, and it's now going to move into the commercial side. And they're looking for, if you can believe it, they're looking for an increase over 3 years of $16. I mean, we're talking, $5.50 to $6 an hour increase over the next period of time. So it'll be, to the point, we haven't had any crisis during this time, except gas prices have been going up, but people have been tolerating it because they don't think there's that much to do. It'll be fascinating to see whether in the last 20 days of this campaign, we actually get something that eats into the 905 that causes the government to do something, whether they are to step in and do something. But right now, people are just on cruise control at the moment, and they're just not engaged to throw the government out.
Well, I've got the issue, Keith, that I think could light a fire from your old neighborhood in the east end of Toronto. I was out there. Well, I was picking up some friends, and we were driving to the west end, out to Islington and the Queensway. It took me longer to get from Victoria Park and Danforth to the Gardiner than it did to get out to Islington on the Gardiner, because they've shut down the road. They cut off that end of the Gardiner Expressway. There's no access anymore. So where the hell is the highways chant in the east end of Toronto? I can't believe that is not a huge issue for folks who are living out in the beach.
Yeah, but it looks so much nicer when you come down that end of the Gardiner now. And
they don't seem to care.
And I used to I lived in Cabbagetown, I would have to go pretty much almost out to Leslie Street when I come off at that end and drive back down into Cabbagetown because of the way they've changed Lakeshore Boulevard with that teardown. I still support it. Basically, you should know better than to be driving from Victoria Park and Danforth through the city. It's just, don't do that. Get on the subway. What are you doing out there with your car?
Yeah, but there's no other way to. There was no other way to get there. I mean,
I'm being
that's
facetious,
the problem.
but that's just it. There comes a point where I felt this for years in Toronto, that my car was only good for leaving the city, and even then, what's the quickest way to get? It would, as you say, take as long. And I was in the core of the city in Cabbagetown. It would take me sometimes 20, 25 minutes to get to the Gardiner, and then I could be out in Mississauga in 15.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Now, on the other hand, I could be out in Mississauga in an hour and 15 as well. But using the car within the city, I don't think, I think the Premier's response on this is what most people want to hear, and that's, subways, more public transit. The highways are for the 905, not necessarily the 416. It's, what we should have had was the Spadina Expressway, and we can talk to Bill Davis about that, and then the whole situation would have been a lot different in the core of the city. And many people would have lost homes that are now worth millions and millions of dollars. But we'd have had some other way of getting out to the northeast end of the city.
You'd have had what we otherwise call a ring road.
Excuse me, the northwest side. Yes, right? Exactly.
And that's how it would have worked. But
you would never have had Larry Grossman either.
There you go.
There you go.
But it just seems funny that, we're talking about things that are outraging. You talk to anybody who lives, east of the Don Valley Parkway in Toronto, and that's the thing that comes up. They're pissed right off. Where is that?
Well, and even more so if you try it on the weekends in the summer, when half of the roads are again taken down for the, open air Toronto. It's
active
great stuff.
TO.
Access. Yeah. It's wonderful, but it makes the traffic even worse. And to the point that the traffic on the weekends is the worst in many parts of the city, especially, as you say, on the east side of Yonge Street. So that's an issue. But the Progressive Conservatives, I think they've nailed it. First of all, the 416, they're way more competitive than people thought they would be. And I think sticking to the subways and transit idea is working for them there. It's going to work in the city. I think it makes sense. I think as well, when we were talking earlier about candidates and, The NDP certainly has had issues with candidates, and it's how it's handled as well. And Ms. Horwath has certainly come under some criticism there. Very, very late to get rid of Paul Miller, a sitting member, as a candidate. He's launched a lawsuit now. Other issues with other candidates. And yet when the issue came up with the education minister, Mr. Lecce, taking part in a slave auction way back the year the iPhone was invented, Premier Ford, PC leader Ford, just said, he's apologized. He was 19. He was actually 20. Let's just move on. I'm standing by my candidate. This is it. He was young and stupid, and he's learned a lot since then. I think, people get that. I think people go, yes, he was young, and, he wasn't, even though 2006 doesn't seem possible to me that the education minister could have still been in university at that point, but he was. And so therefore you look at it in that context. Are we really going to want for the rest of our lives what was said or done in high school and college to be used against us? I know there's several lines, and participating in a slave auction may be a line too far for some people, but, you do learn, you do grow from these things. Although in 2007, I think pretty much everyone knew slave auctions were not a thing you should have been doing.
Yeah. But even, before we came on, you were commenting, Sabrina, about surprising, perhaps, to some that Doug Ford is managing his caucus in a very quiet, deliberate way. Even in this case, where we've got the education minister at the center of this thing, there's barely a ripple on the water.
Yeah, there's something to be said about that. And, Doug Ford is not your typical, capital C conservative politician. He comes from local politics. He's kind of a disruptive guy. Ford Nation is not the same as the PC party. And he hasn't, had the best track record in the past when it comes to caucus management. Like there's a ton of conservatives who cross the floor, Amanda Simard over French language services cuts, some of which have been reversed. She's now in the Liberal team. There were some anti-lockdown people who crossed the floor, and Randy Hillier, who I think has, jumped the shark a little bit, but he's been a thorn in the side of every single conservative leader that he's, come into contact with. And he wasn't booted from the party for, what we've seen him do over the pandemic, which I think, he's been censured by all his colleagues now in the legislature. But he was booted for, heckling autism parents when the House leader was like, everyone stay quiet over those, controversial debates or like it's a very political hot potato. And so I guess, he doesn't have the best track record forward when it comes to dealing with his own caucus mates. But what we've seen with Lecce is kind of a better handling. I think he kind of ends up coming out looking better and more of a steady leader than his opponents, than Horwath and Del Duca, because of their candidate drama. Keith mentioned Paul Miller. There's Kevin Yard, one of the few black MPPs out of Brampton that was challenged. And, you had your own caucus members, Andrea Horwath and the NDP, calling out leadership. And so what Ford has managed to do here, okay, it wasn't so great that he stayed quiet on this on the first day. We were asking the party, what does the premier have to say about this? They were like, Lecce's apology stands. Of course, when Ford, comes up finally after a few days and actually takes questions from reporters, that was the first question he was asked. And he tried to shut it down, not to give it oxygen, not to make more headlines. You don't ever create more questions than answers, I guess, is the political strategy here. And he was like, I'm standing by him. And there's something to be said for that, I think. He explained it away as Lecce was young at the time. He knows it was inappropriate. He's apologized. That should not dismiss all the work he's done for the black community and anti-racism in schools today. And so I think, Ford kind of looks like the best handler of this drama that we've seen. Whereas Del Duca with his candidates, it was like, well, we didn't know. And now that we know, we're going to get rid of him. Andrea Horwath, has been wishy-washy when speaking about some of the nomination drama too. And of course, a lot of this is up to the parties to decide. But I think maybe, this is also part of Doug Ford 2.0 about how much he's changed over recent years. And since 2018, that maybe he is kind of becoming more of a political party partisan leader than, Ford Nation, bull in a china shop style politician.
Yeah, he's no longer in search of the china shop.
I just wanted to say, I thought the thing that made Ford look like he was squirming was when he was asked about the MPP allowances from the riding associations. The Progressive Conservatives taking those. That's like adding on to the gravy train, exactly the opposite brand. And so he came out with, at least he said, well, I want to tighten up on that. He basically said he didn't really know about it. They obeyed the law. There's nothing wrong here. Elections Ontario has signed off on it, but I want to tighten down on that. He looked pretty vulnerable on that. As he did, I thought, during the debate, I thought the opposition leaders missed a real point when they were asked. They didn't even raise the pandemic, but when it was raised by the moderator, you could see steam coming out of Ford's ears when they were criticizing him. He seemed like he didn't expect that he clearly is vulnerable in that. And they didn't follow up. They didn't say, you know what, we're going to get, because it's the long-term care deaths that I think he's very vulnerable on. And they didn't follow up. They didn't say, both the Liberals and NDP are looking to get the private sector out of the long-term care. They didn't even follow up on that. They need to do that in Monday's debate and not worry so much about whether Ford has binders and briefing notes there to help him through the debate.
Yeah.
You know what, though? you got to give a lot of credit to Corey Tanaki and Nick Kouvalis for running a campaign since last October, November, which has been right on the rails and very smooth. And the one thing that you sometimes forget is that while the leaders get posed these questions, they're in the din of the moment, right? You actually have a team which, if they're good enough, are slightly above it all, who know that when something is raised, how to respond. It's almost like, you want the leader to have that little earpiece that says, when they say this, say that. But effectively, they're the ones calling the shots in this. We've known in the last campaign, it was David Hurley who called the shots on the government. I mean, there's legends of stories that go back not just for the recent provincial campaigns, but all campaigns where the campaign manager goes into cabinet ministers' offices and say, you will say this, you will do this or that. I mean, they are in control of the campaign. This thing has been run really, really smoothly. It hasn't, the campaign itself, whether it's been hit with a broadside or whether an allegation has been made, nothing's come off the rails. It's been very, very smooth. So by stepping up to the podium and saying what he did about the allowances, and yes, he was a little bit flustered, but the reality is that the campaign has not reacted badly to any of the allegations. And it just speaks to how they've managed this and how who would have thought that they would have hoisted the budget and gone to the people? That's a calculation that they had to make. They had to make a calculation about, we're going to talk about highways and we're not going to talk about healthcare. Those are all calculations. And the Tories have got a good campaign team, which I don't think are going to be around. The same team is going to be around for the next go round. But the A team is in the seat right now. We'll see what comes next in the years to follow.
So
well,
I know
also,
that.
if I could just jump in to John made me think that's kind of why Ford hasn't been up so much. Like the opposition leaders they'll speak to us for over an hour sometimes, us reporters, but it's working in their favor not to have Ford up taking questions as much. That's probably part of why they want, to give him briefing notes during Monday's debate, is because it's less opportunity for him to get off track, off the cuff. But in terms of MPP allowances, I think that one worked in his favor. He kind of defended it. So there's no, wrongdoing by the rules, but maybe it's the rules that are the problem, because he's right. That's not a Ford brand. He's all about, taxpayer accountability, putting money back in people's pockets, as he likes to put it. So I think, it's all a very calculated strategy, as has been pointed out.
So just before we go, and I realize that, there's sort of been this edict that we're not going to have anybody from the federal party weigh in on this campaign for the Conservatives, and we want to stay away from the leadership of the Conservatives federally as far as the provincials are concerned. They want to kind of have their own lane. But when you see a piece from Kelly McParland in the National Post, and the headline is "Pierre Poilievre is too big a risk to lead the Conservatives." Keith, I know you've done your fair share of writing for the Spectator, etc. And they'll tell you we want so many words or so much space to occupy the newspaper. Kelly only had to write the first paragraph of the piece. Poilievre's performance in the first two Conservative leadership debates is a strong argument against his suitability for the job of Prime Minister. Whether Conservatives nonetheless decide to put him in charge of the party will say a lot about their credibility as a potential alternative to the Liberal government. Of course, they'll just turn the guns and suggest, well, that's just some elite journalist talking about, things that don't really matter or has no connection to. But the idea that he's talking about firing, and that is Poilievre firing the governor of the Bank of Canada, and this sort of unhinged campaign over, the currency and Bitcoin and all this nonsense. Man, talk about extreme from Doug Ford. But we've just created this maelstrom of what the hell are you talking about?
Well, it's a real combative style, isn't it? And, we need to fire the Bank of Canada governor because of Bitcoin. We'll get us all into Dogecoin. What? I mean, but it gets media attention because, A, we love conflict, and B, this guy's walking conflict. He's campaigning very much like we saw Trump do in 2016, isn't he? He's just out there saying.
Except Fox was following and eating his load of shit. In this case, it's the National Post saying, hold on, who the hell is this guy?
Well, that's because Canadians have eventually a different sensibility. Even Canadian small C conservatives have a different sensibility than the Americans when it comes to, party before all and this sort of nonsense. They're just saying, look, this guy is, if you want someone who's really that feisty and fiery and always tearing stuff down, he'll make a great conservative leader. He's not going to get elected prime minister. And I believe that's the argument that Jean Charest keeps saying, and that most people, when they finish watching one of these debates, go, Charest's the one that kind of looks like a prime minister. And do we want another 4 years in opposition of just hammering away at the Liberals and enabling them and tripping over our social conservative issues? Because if it goes down the way of Mr. Poilievre, it's going to be that same stupid old argument again. Or they want someone that's just going to bring that, I know they don't like to use this word, progressive conservative side, and, let the Peter MacKay type thinking. I don't know if Mr. MacKay will have anything to do with them, but bring that sort of moderate thinking back in. And that's what needs to happen in this leadership race. And right now, from what we've seen from Mr. Poilievre, is he knows how to get headlines. He knows how to get attention, and he knows how to get applause. He's drawing big crowds. There's a core that absolutely loves the guy. And it was interesting, and what I thought in the federal conservative debate was when the moderator, Tom Clark, said, and the debate is, this is a national debate. It's being carried live tonight on CTV and CBC, and the CBC got booed just for being mentioned for carrying the damn debate.
Yeah.
That's his core. That's his core right there. And, you can say what you want about the CBC, and I know a lot of conservatives do think it's time to, defund or take a serious look at the CBC. But just for them carrying the national debate, they didn't need to be booed for that. This guy is just so far down that right-wing rabbit hole, but there's a core, but is that core, it's enough to get him the conservative leadership? Maybe, although how you outsell Patrick Brown in conservative memberships, I don't know. That's the key issue there. But this guy, he knows how to get the attention, and he's going to continue to draw all the media attention because of who he is and how he campaigns.
But I think you've raised a really good point, and that is, in Ontario, it's just a very different brand. I mean, even in Ontario, if you take a look at the polling numbers, Poilievre doesn't do very well. Among Ontarians, and especially in Quebec. You might get, 70% of those people who are voting for the Conservatives in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta to vote for him, and somewhat in Eastern Canada, but you don't in Ontario or in Quebec. It's just not there. It's a little bit like Kellogg's. There are Fruit Loops and there's Shreddies and there's cornflakes. And not everybody eats Fruit Loops, buddy. We'll see where this goes, but I think you can get lots of kids out to eat Fruit Loops, but you got a bigger market for cornflakes. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I think the bottom line on this, we'll maybe just close with it, Sabrina, is that who would have thought 4 years ago that Doug Ford might be considered the sort of the elder statesman in the conservative movement and the one that we really kind of want to stand behind in this country.
Not me. I mean, what a difference, 4 years in a pandemic will do to you. But I think it's working for him. You know, he's presenting himself as the calm, steady hand. Of course, I think if we were given more opportunities to ask him questions, maybe throw him off his talking points, which I'm hoping happens on Monday, get out your popcorn. This could get pretty heated.
All right, well, we'll leave it at that. We'll head into the weekend, and of course, Monday night will be the debate night, and we'll watch that with interest, if not popcorn. Yes, so we're making the turn, and whether or not these last couple of weeks, give or take, will be the sprint, we'll have to wait to see. But I suspect that that's what's going to happen. We're just going to see everybody pick up their game, pick up their intensity, pick up the pace, and off we go. And we'll be here to make sure that, we're giving you the 360 view of what's going on out on the campaign and what to expect afterwards. This is The Writ Race. It is the daily version of On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network. I'm Dave Trafford with Sabrina and Angie, Keith Leslie, and John Wright. Enjoy your weekend.